What is going on, guys? I'm Jack and welcome back to Project Race Car. In today's video we are going to run through exactly how much it costs to get a Skyline R34 GTT just like this one to 500 horsepower or thereabouts. So I'm going to run through everything that I've done to the car to get it to this level, all the cost of the parts, what we had to do, some things you may or may not need to do depending on what your setup is. And obviously, yeah, just run through absolutely everything so you guys can see how much it costs to get the car to this level. So if you haven't seen the first drive video, I'd recommend going and watch that first, because then you'll see the results of obviously what we're talking about. And obviously there is still plenty more to come with this car in terms of power and upgrades and things like that. Without further ado, let's go and pop the bonnet and go through all of the parts under the engine bay first before we get onto everything else around the car. Let's go. So guys, before we get going on the car, as always, we are up on Dartmoor because it's very quiet up here today. Actually, I think bleak but beautiful is the best description of Dartmoor that I've ever heard, which is probably true, and there's loads of sheep floating around over there. So anyway, that's just a little quick introduction to where we're filming at. If you're down in the southwest, you know where I'm talking about. So anyway, let's crack on. So I will say, for those of you who haven't actually seen the engine bay of the Skyline, it is not that clean. All right, so just bear that in mind. Obviously, there's plenty of work to be done here still on the cleanliness and tidiness of the engine bay, but nonetheless, obviously we'll go through the parts as I mentioned. So I'll tell you what, let's start at the front and work our way back. So I'll apologise now, this is going to be a lot of me pointing the camera at things and talking over it, so just bear that in mind. But anyway, let's start from the front. So obviously this is going to assume that you've got some parts on your 34 or Skyline. Obviously this is mostly applicable to the 34 GTT because it's a Neo engine, but there are some similarities between the Series 1 and Series 2 RB25s. So obviously if you've got a 26, it's a bit of a different story because you've got twin turbos and so on. Anyway, obviously you're going to need a intercooler. Obviously they come with intercoolers from the factory, but I'd recommend a front mount, which is obviously what all this piping here is for. Let's assume you've got a front mount intercooler. Let's assume you've got an exhaust as well, at least cat back, and we'll go from there. So, right, first thing that we did, well not the first thing that we did, but the first thing in order that we did was we changed the radiator. So we didn't actually plan to change the radiator, but when we pulled the old one out, it was 20 years old, it was haggard. So for the sake of £180, which is what I paid for this Jap speed radiator, I'd recommend doing it. You can do twin electric fans if you want. I've just kept the viscous one for the minute, but they will get changed at some point because obviously this is a lot thicker than the standard radiator, so that's worth bearing in mind. There are some clearance issues and stuff like that. Anyway, it's £180 I pay for this Jap speed radiator. You can spend more, if you want to get a OG JDM one, Blitz one, or whatever. They are a lot more, but let's label this as £180 on the screen now. So moving further up, I don't know if you can see it in here, but we do actually have an ARP Motorsports trigger kit. Well, it's not a full trigger kit, but it is essentially a plate that goes on the CAS to allow it to work with the new ECU, which we'll get onto in a bit. So I think if you can either go full like PRP trigger kit if you want, but as I said, ARP Motorsports do this kit, which is I believe it's £230 plus VAT, so it's around £280 for one of these. It's pretty much a must, I think, for the tuner. There are some debates as to whether it's essential, but I'd say that it probably is. So moving on, I got fed up of pointing the camera at the stuff and not you guys not seeing my face. So let's crack on with this. So yeah, mention the trigger kit. Again, let's assume that you've got some intercooler piping to match your intercooler. It doesn't necessarily have to be, crossover and all this sort of stuff. This is obviously using standard intake manifold and intake plenum. You can obviously get an aftermarket one if you want, but it will run around 500 horsepower, probably a bit more on the standard intake manifold. So you don't actually need to change it if you don't want to. Obviously, for looks and tidiness, I definitely recommend changing it to either Gredi, a Freddy, or Plasma Man if you've got the money for it. But obviously, they're pricey. So I'm not going to include the intercooler piping in my estimates because obviously, it's subject to your build. But obviously, just factor that in. Most cars have it anyway, but obviously, if it's stock, it's probably not going to. Anyway, moving on. So next up, you probably can't see it. What you can see though is our amazing bodge that we had to do to hold this coil pack plug on the other day. That's a long story, but essentially the plug's cracked. I've got replacement plugs, so that's getting changed, but it's currently held on by string, so the car drives. If you're going to bodge stuff, bodge it properly, right? Anyway, coil packs. Coil packs are a must, guys. The original factory ones will probably run at 500 horsepower, but if they're 20 years old, they're probably just going to fall to bits. So I'd recommend replacing them. There are some options. Split fire unfortunately no longer exists. You can get them, but you will pay absolutely through the nose for them. So there are a few options. You can obviously do like R8 coil conversions or R35 coil conversions. They are fairly pricey, guys, so obviously the coils themselves and the conversion harnesses and things like that. So what I did is I went with a brand called Superformer. They're actually produced just up the road here in Devon. They're a subsidiary of JDM Garage. If you guys probably know JDM Garage if you've got a Skyline. So they produce them in-house in Devon. I haven't had any problems with them yet. I've only had the car back a couple of weeks, but supposedly they've tested them to over 900 horsepower in their Skylines. So worth doing. Definitely replace them. You know, for the sake of 300 quid. I didn't actually mention the price. 300 quid for a set of Superformers. Split fires are going to be anywhere from 450 upwards now because they're obviously limited supply. So that's definitely another option for you. I'm going to label it as £300 for a set of those. So I'm going to make another assumption here on the basis that you guys have got some sort of non-standard air filter or induction kit system. So we've got the HKS mushroom filter, and then we've had some pipe made up to obviously fit the new turbo, which we'll get onto in a bit. I'm not going to include that in the estimations because obviously a lot of cars have that, and that's sort of subject to your own personal choice. Also, it came in the car, so I don't know how much it was, but you know, that's a pretty safe assumption, I think, for most cars that have just got basic bolt-ons that are looking to make that sort of power. Moving further up, we've got the Mack 3-port Boost Solenoid. Hopefully you can see that okay. There we go, on the engine tuner bracket. That is, depending on your setup, pretty much essential. You could obviously run it a different way, but I would imagine most people will run some sort of 3-port Boost Solenoid. The boost is still controlled by the ECU, so yeah, so you don't have to worry about that side of things, which we'll get onto in a bit with the ECU and stuff. But yeah, definitely recommend a Mack 3-port Boost Solenoid or something equivalent. How you want to mount it is up to you. I went with the engine tuner made bracket. Mack 3-port Boost Solenoid, 50 quid. So not too bad, pretty cheap really. Does the job. Renowned reliability and stuff with those from Mack. I think it's produced in Germany, so you know what the Germans are like, absolutely crazy reliability and efficiency. So anyway, cracking on. Moving on to the, well, let's call it the main event, shall we? So turbo choice. So obviously there's a lot of options with turbos. You guys can choose pretty much any turbo you want that will do the horsepower that you're after. So obviously if you're after for around 500, which I guess you probably are if you're watching this video, there are a few options. So I went with the Mamba GTX 3071R, which is essentially a Garrett 3071R Gen 2. You can obviously go for a 3076R. You could go for a new G-Series turbo. When I ordered my Mamba turbo, Garrett didn't do a T3 fitment G-Series turbo. They only did V-band. That's now changed. You can actually get a T3 fitted Garrett G-Series turbo, which is cool. So that is definitely an option because the G-Series turbos do spool quite a bit quicker. You could get, you know, a G30 660 or G35 770, I believe it is. You know, for a bit of headroom, depending on what your power goals are. You know, I'll leave that up to you. However, turbo choice is obviously going to be the main cost here. With this sort of build, because you know that's one of the most pricey items in the build. So I paid $1,050 or so, plus import fees and VAT and shipping from Mamba. So it's around about 850 quid. I'll double check the conversion rate and stick it on the screen, but let's add 850 quid to the tally down the bottom of the screen here. So let's have a look at her. So we do have a Funk Motorsport blanket on the turbo, as you can probably see, and some wrap on the downpipe. So you can obviously go top mount, but you're obviously going to be spending another £1,000 or so on a manifold for that, you know, if you go V-band or whatever. So that is an additional cost, which is the main reason I kept it low mount, got T3 fitment turbo and kept it at that. So as I said, turbo choice is going to be a huge factor in the cost of this build. So you know, a genuine Garrett G-Series turbo is going to be sort of 1,700 quid, probably 1,800 quid, somewhere around there. Same sort of price for a genuine 3076R. So you know, huge saving on the Mamba turbo. I'm still excited to see, you know, how it's going to do in terms of longevity and more power if we ever get there. So yeah, so turbo's good so far, but yeah, obviously time will tell. So moving on. Skylines are a bit weird compared to other cars in the sense that they've got like two downpipes almost. They've got like what's called a turbo elbow, which is what comes straight out of the turbo, and then that goes into the downpipe. Obviously, if you've got a custom downpipe, you can just make it all into one. But there are a few companies that build or make turbo elbows for the RB25s. One of those is Tomei. They are probably the most expensive turbo elbow for the pipes, you know, only 12 inches long or whatever it is. But I tell you what, it is definitely worth replacing. This is one of those things that's not actually essential to replace as part of this build. You can run it on the stock turbo elbow. It's just very, very limiting in terms of flow, and it will make it more difficult for you to make the power. So I would definitely recommend replacing it. I'm a big fan of Tomei, as you guys know, so I've replaced it with a Tomei one. Worth noting that the Tomei Turbo Elbow is £384, guys, in the UK. So you might be able to get it cheaper if you get it from Japan, but yeah, it's a pricey one. However, it is totally worth it. If you need any validation, because obviously we didn't really get it before and after, go and watch Samit's video on his 33.4, where he replaced his turbo elbow, stock turbo elbow, with a Tomei and gained 70 horsepower, guys. 70 horsepower, which is mental. So moving on a bit further back in the car, as I said, I'm going to assume that you've got a turbo back exhaust. You may not have, but obviously if you don't, you will probably want to get a 3-inch downpipe. Brand doesn't really matter. I believe this car actually just has a generic 3-inch downpipe on it. Obviously the catback is the Tomei system. I will end up replacing the downpipe with a proper JDM one at some point, but that's for later on. So definitely worth getting 3-inch all the way back, including the turbo elbow, because obviously, as I said, turbo elbow, stock turbo elbow is a very restricting design. For some reason, I don't know why Nissan did that, as we said in previous videos, but they did. So worth getting it all the way back. I'm not going to include that in the estimations, as I said, because, you know, that's sort of personal preference, and a lot of cars already have that. If you want to run a cat or a high flow cat, you know, get that checked out with your tuner before you do it, because obviously it's going to potentially limit things. So you don't really need to go 4-inch at this power level. You can do if you want, but literally no need. Speaking of downpipe, you will probably want to get a wideband sensor or of some kind. You can also get a CAN lambda if you're running an ECU, which again we'll get to in a bit, which is in the passenger footwell. We're running an wideband sensor, so we can do closed loop fueling. It's not absolutely essential, but it is safer for the car, where it can learn the fuel tables and stuff like that. I don't fully understand how it works. Go talk to your tuner if you want to know. But I definitely recommend running a wideband or a CAN lambda. The CAN lambda, I believe, is around £300. I'll put it on the screen, and I think the AFR gauge or the wideband sensor with the gauge was around 200. Again, I'll put it on the screen and update the total. I don't have the invoices with me, unfortunately, so I'm doing it from memory, but nonetheless. So one thing we did miss was the engine itself. Obviously we didn't really touch on the engine when we were moving through the car. That is because the RB25 Neo specifically are very, very strong, and there's not a huge amount that you need to do with them. So as you would have seen if you followed our build process, the only thing we ended up doing to this motor was ARP head studs. So we've left the bottom end stock, we left the cams in, because obviously we've got VCT and stuff like that, stock cams, and yeah, we just did ARP head studs, and that should be enough just to keep the head down and not damage anything. So ARP head studs are essential, guys. I would not run 500 horsepower especially, I would not run an RB25 Neo without them, because you will lift the head off and all kinds of bad things will happen. So for the sake of 180 quid, which is what these cost, I would do them. And they're not that difficult to do. If you want to see how we did it, I'll link to a video up here. You know, we did it with the head on. We didn't even have to take the head off. We left the head gasket in, the stock head gasket, or the one that was in there, and went from there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it from the engine bay side of things. Oh, no, it's not. One thing we definitely forgot: injectors, guys. Injectors are fairly important to the success of this build. So I will give you some advice now, guys. I ended up buying some second-hand R34 GTR injectors, which are 570cc, so cc wise more than plenty to do 500 horsepower. However, I would definitely recommend spending the money and getting brand new ASNUs, IDs, Deechworks, something like that, because by the time I had them all cleaned, flow tested, had to replace one because it was faulty, I was most of the way there to a set of brand new ones. So definitely learn from my advice and get brand new ones. It's around 680 quid, I think, for a set of Deechworks. I will again put it on the screen. I paid 100 quid for the injectors, 150 quid for cleaning, and then 40 quid plus another 40 quid or so for the additional injector that I had to buy. I'm in for around 350, 360, but I would definitely recommend getting brand new ones. As I'm filming this, I just realised that I didn't actually mention at the start of this video, so I'm going to add it in now. This is specifically for pump gas in the UK. So I'm running Tesco 99 on this. Obviously this is not for E85 or methanol or any of those sorts of things, so it's not going to include any of that. You can obviously run that, but you will need to do your own research on what you need for either methanol or E85 or anything like that. Obviously bigger injectors, bigger fuel pump, methanol system, that sort of stuff. So do your own research on that. This is purely for pump gas. Pump gas? I'm not American. Pump fuel, you know, normal fuel. So one thing I totally forgot to mention actually, guys, is you are going to want a new map sensor, because the stock map sensor will only go up to 1 bar. So I've gone with a Link 3-bar map sensor. You could go with a 4 if you want. We also did delete the MAF as well, worth pointing out. It's just pipe there now. So yes, definitely replace the map sensor. You can use the factory wiring for the link map sensor. I believe it plumbs into the original MAF wiring on the stock loom, but double check that with somebody before you go and do it. Yeah, so definitely do that. I'd recommend deleting the MAF if you're running a link or anything like that. So guys, as I'm editing this video, I just realised that I did miss off another fairly important part of the build process. You are going to need to change the clutch. So a stock OEM clutch or even a slightly outrated clutch is probably not going to handle the power of 500 horsepower. So what I did is I went for an extreme 6-puck clutch. They are an Aussie company. They've been making clutches for drift cars for a while, and after doing some research, that was the one that I went with. You obviously can choose whichever brand you prefer. Obviously if you want to go twin plate, you can. I went a little bit over what I actually needed for the build, and I think that's depending on your budget and obviously other things. I always think that's a good idea anyway. So I said the extreme 6-plate clutch, extreme 6-puck clutch, I can't talk, was, just looking at my invoice, £670 with VAT. I also got a competition clutch, lightweight flywheel, which I would recommend doing, because I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure if it's the clutch or the flywheel. I'm thinking it's more the clutch. That clutch is fantastic for a street car. It's rated at £680 for your torque, so it's a big beefy clutch. Will be perfect for what we need it for, and it also isn't that heavy. It hardly judders at all. There is a slight judder every now and again, but for the sort of clutch that it is, it's absolutely fantastic, and I will probably do a proper review on that at some point. So yeah, it was just over 1,100 quid for the clutch and the flywheel and ARP bolts and stuff like that. So that's broadly what you're going to pay for that sort of clutch. Obviously you don't have to do the flywheel, and you don't have to have that beefier clutch if you don't want to. I think we're running about £460 for your torque from memory, so it is over what we need, but nonetheless I would recommend going over, always buy over what you need is my sort of motto anyway. So yeah, anyway, back to the video. So as I said guys, I believe we've covered everything under the engine bay. I may have missed something, apologies if I have. Now moving on to the ECU. So if you guys know, the ECU is down here in the passenger footwell. As you know, I've gone with the Link ECU, Link G4X. I would definitely recommend going with a standalone ECU. That's going to be down to the preference of your tuner, what you choose, in my opinion. So if your tuner prefers Link, go with Link. If he prefers Haltech, go with Haltech, Motec, etc. So check that out with whoever it is that's going to be tuning it before you guys purchase your ECU. Most tuners will tune a lot of things, but some will only tune certain ECUs. So definitely check that out before you buy one. However, obviously you may be tempted to go with the NIS tune. NIS tunes are perfectly fine, they're not too bad. However, they are just modified stock ECUs, so they are limiting in terms of what you can do with them. Yes, they're a lot cheaper, they're 300-400 quid, but I would definitely recommend going standalone ECU if you can. Not only is it better, it also future-proofs you for anything else you want to do with the car. If you want to go more power, if you want to go flex fuel sensor, for methanol, E85, that sort of thing, it's just a lot easier. So it may not be applicable to everybody's build, but for me, that's what I went with. I believe with the G4X and all the sensors, I had 10% off, I believe, when I ordered it. I think it was 1,580. Again, I'll stick it on the screen, update total, and yeah, let's move on. So moving on to the back of the car, obviously there's not going to be much down this end, but not that it's strictly relevant, and again I'm not going to include it, but worth mentioning. Make sure you've got decent tyres on, guys. Don't be putting budget tyres on if you're running 500 horsepower in a Skyline, because you will end up in a tree. So in terms of the actual back end of the car, which hopefully you can see there, as I said, make sure you've got a decent exhaust system, or at least a 3-inch exhaust system. Diffuser is definitely optional, but it looks awesome, so I can recommend the top secret diffuser for sure. Let's open the boot, because there is something in the boot that I need to show you. Those of you who know, it's the fuel system, so yeah, let's open the boot and have a look. So guys, I apologise for the state of the boot. The car's just been going to car shows every weekend and hasn't been cleared out. Also, I've got all my camera gear and stuff in here, but fortunately, well, I say fortunately, currently the cover for the fuel pump is still off, because it was being worked on by the guys down at Engine Tuner, but obviously that allows you to see the top end of the fuel pump, which obviously brings us on to what I was going to talk about. You will need to change the fuel pump, guys. A Walbro 255 or 255 litres per hour fuel pump will probably do it. However, for what it costs, I just go with a 450. That's what I did. It was 100 quid thereabouts for the pump. We did end up having to hardwire it, which I'd recommend doing anyway. So it was about 70 quid for the hard wiring. So now we've obviously got a solid pump. So obviously if you're going to run like E85 or something like that, or methanol in the tank, you'll need to, as I said, check what size fuel pump you're going to need. But for pump fuel, 450 litres per hour will be plenty for 500 horsepower, way more than you need. So guys, hopefully that was helpful. I don't think I've missed anything. Apologies if I have. Feel free to leave any comments below if you think I did miss anything, or if you've got any questions, as always. Obviously, this assumption, or these assumptions that I've made on prices and things are in the UK, and they are not including labour or anything like that, or shipping or whatnot. So definitely bear that in mind. It's only going to be a guide, what we've come up with here. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up down below. It really helps us out. Also leave us a comment with what you thought about the video, whether we could have done some things differently on the build, if you think we missed anything, if you've got any questions about your build. As always, let us know down below. But apologies, it's been quite a lot of talking today, but hopefully that answers some of your guys' questions that you gave in the last video, as I mentioned. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to stop waffling on now. I'm going to go, we're actually going to film another video up here today, and then go for a drive. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. We'll catch you again soon. Cheers for now. Bye.